Every time you fill up your car, every time you pay your electricity bill, every time an airline raises its ticket prices, there is one man whose decisions made that happen. He controls more oil than any other single person on Earth. He commands a sovereign wealth fund worth over $700 billion. He rules a kingdom the size of Western Europe. And most people in the West celebrate him as a reformer, a modernizer, a young leader dragging an ancient kingdom into the future. But here's the thing, that narrative is not entirely wrong. It is just not the whole story, because behind the Formula One races, the women's rights reforms, and the $500 billion city in the desert, there is a story about what happens when one man concentrates absolute power with no checks, no accountability, and no consequences. His name is Mohammed bin Salman, and he is reshaping global politics in ways that affect every single one of us. Mohammed bin Salman, known as MBS, is the crown prince and prime minister of Saudi Arabia. At 38, he is one of the youngest leaders of a major world power. He controls Saudi Aramco, the most profitable company in history. He chairs OPEC's most powerful member state, and through Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund, he has financial reach into almost every major economy on Earth. Right now, in 2024, his decisions about oil production, regional alliances, and the future of the Middle East are directly shaping the world you live in. MBS was born in 1985, not into the senior line of the Saudi royal family, but into one of its more peripheral branches. His father, Salman, was one of the younger sons of the kingdom's founder. His mother was Salman's third wife. Not a politically powerful family, not a major tribal alliance. By the logic of the Saudi system, Mohammed bin Salman should have been irrelevant. But he made one decision early that changed everything. Instead of going abroad like most Saudi princes, instead of building international networks at Oxford or Harvard, he stayed home. He stayed close to his father. He made himself indispensable. By 2013, he was Salman's personal chief of staff, managing information, controlling access, learning power from the inside. When Salman became king in January 2015, Mohammed was appointed Minister of Defense within days. He was 30 years old. By 2017, he was Crown Prince, first in line to the throne, and already the undisputed center of Saudi power. In less than 3 years, he had gone from a peripheral prince that most of the royal family had barely noticed to the most powerful figure in the kingdom. That is not luck. That is one of the most deliberate political ascents of the modern era. So how does MBS actually hold and exercise power? Because this is where the story gets genuinely instructive. His approach rests on 3 distinct mechanisms. The first is control of information and access. Long before he had any formal title, MBS understood that real power is not about the position on the door. It is about who controls what goes through that door. As his father's chief of staff, he managed the flow of information to one of the most powerful men in Saudi Arabia. He decided what Salman saw, what he heard, and who got access to him. That is not an administrative role. That is a power role. And MBS used it to build influence long before anyone took him seriously enough to stop him. The second mechanism is the elimination of competing power centers. In November 2017, MBS invited hundreds of the kingdom's most powerful men, princes, ministers, billionaires, to the Ritz-Carlton hotel in Riyadh. And then he locked the doors. The official narrative was anti-corruption. And Saudi Arabia does have a genuine corruption problem, but the people detained were not selected randomly based on evidence. They were selected because they had independent power, independent wealth, independent influence, people who could theoretically challenge MBS. After the Ritz-Carlton, every significant power center in Saudi Arabia reported directly to one man. No independent judiciary, no free press, no political opposition, no military command outside his control. The anti-corruption campaign was real in the sense that some corrupt people were caught, but it was primarily a political operation, absolute power disguised as a moral crusade. The third mechanism is economic leverage. Through Vision 2030, MBS is restructuring the entire Saudi economy, reducing dependence on oil, building tourism, technology, and entertainment sectors. But Vision 2030 is not just an economic plan, it is a political tool. By making himself the architect of Saudi Arabia's future, MBS has made himself indispensable to every young Saudi who wants that future to arrive. And globally, by controlling OPEC's most powerful member, he has leverage over the energy costs of every major economy on Earth. When MBS decides to cut oil production, energy prices rise globally. Inflation increases. Central banks raise interest rates. Mortgages become more expensive. One man's strategic calculation ripples through the lives of billions of people who have never heard his name. So what does MBS's power actually mean for the world? Start with the economy. Saudi Arabia produces roughly 10% of the world's oil. As OPEC's dominant member, it effectively sets the floor for global energy prices. When MBS cut production in 2022 and 2023 against the explicit requests of the United States, global energy prices spiked. That spike fed directly into the inflation crisis that raised the cost of living for hundreds of millions of people across Europe and North America. One decision, one man, felt in every household on Earth. Now look at regional geopolitics. MBS has fundamentally repositioned Saudi Arabia as a neutral power, willing to do business with Washington and Beijing simultaneously. In 2023, Saudi Arabia and Iran, bitter regional rivals for decades, signed a normalization agreement brokered by China, not the United States, China. That single diplomatic shift signaled a reordering of Middle Eastern alliances that Western governments are still trying to process. And then there is the soft power dimension. Formula One in Jeddah, the 2034 FIFA World Cup, Live Golf, the Saudi Pro League, Cristiano Ronaldo, Neymar, Karim Benzema. Critics call it sports washing, the deliberate use of major sporting events to rehabilitate an international image damaged by Yemen and Khashoggi. And the evidence supports that criticism, but it is also working because human beings are very good at separating entertainment from politics. When the entertainment is good enough, every time you watch a Formula One race in Jeddah, every time you follow the Saudi Pro League, you are, in a small but real way, part of the rehabilitation strategy. That is not a judgment, it is just something worth knowing. The winners in MBS's world are clear: Saudi Arabia's young population gaining social freedoms, global investors accessing Saudi capital, and Western governments maintaining a strategically vital alliance. The losers are equally clear: the people of Yemen, journalists who criticize the regime, activists who demand rights without waiting for permission, and every government that sacrificed its stated values for an oil contract. Now, we need to talk about what the official narrative leaves out. MBS is frequently presented in Western media as a reformer, a modernizer, a pragmatic young leader making difficult but necessary changes. And some of that is true. Women can now drive. Women can travel without male guardian permission. Cinemas are open for the first time in 35 years. For millions of young Saudis, these changes are genuinely significant. But here's the question you need to sit with. Who fought for those rights? The women who spent years campaigning for the right to drive, the activists who risked their freedom to demand exactly what MBS then delivered. Many of them were arrested, imprisoned, tortured, according to human rights organizations. Loujain al-Hathloul, one of the most prominent women's rights activists in Saudi history, was arrested in 2018. The same year women were finally allowed to drive, she spent nearly 3 years in prison and reported being subjected to electric shocks and waterboarding, according to her family and human rights groups. MBS gave women the right to drive while imprisoning the women who had demanded it. That is not liberation. That is control dressed up as progress. And then there is Jamal Khashoggi. On October 2nd, 2018, Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi walked into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. He never walked out. The CIA concluded with high confidence that MBS personally ordered his killing. The reaction from Western governments was outrage, and then almost nothing happened. Joe Biden flew to Riyadh in 2022 and fist-bumped the Crown Prince on camera. European leaders followed. Arms deals continued, oil contracts were renewed. Think about what this reveals. If you control enough oil, enough capital, enough strategic leverage, you can order the murder of a journalist, and the consequence will be a few months of uncomfortable headlines. The Khashoggi case is not just about one man's guilt. It is about a global order that decided, collectively and deliberately, that his guilt didn't matter enough to act on. That is the structural risk of MBS's model of power. When there are no consequences, there are no limits. So how do we think about Mohammed bin Salman? He is not a cartoon villain. He has done things that genuinely improve the lives of millions of young Saudis. He is also not the enlightened reformer that Western PR campaigns have tried to sell. He is something more complicated and more instructive than either. The women who can now drive, and the women who were tortured for demanding it, the economic modernization and the journalists murdered for questioning it, the regional influence he projects, and the humanitarian catastrophe he created in Yemen, these things are all true simultaneously. And the real lesson of MBS is not about him specifically, it is about what happens when the international community decides that economic interests outweigh human rights, when we decide that oil is worth more than accountability, when we decide that a good Formula One race is reason enough to look the other way. Those are not MBS's decisions. Those are ours. His name is Mohammed bin Salman. He is shaping the world you live in. And the question worth asking, the question this channel will always ask, is not just how he got his power, but what we are all willing to accept in order to keep benefiting from it. This is not just a story about Saudi Arabia. It is a story about the price of power and who really pays it. If this video made you think differently about how global power actually works, subscribe to Power and Persona. New episodes every week. We'll see you in the next one.